I'll praise on the valley, praise in the mountain. I'll praise when I'm sure, and praise when I'm doubting. I'll praise when outnumbered, and praise when surrounded. 'Cause praise is the water my enemies drowning. As long as I'm breathing, I've got a reason to praise the Lord, oh my soul. Praise the Lord, oh my soul. I'll praise when I feel it, and I'll praise when I don't. I'll praise 'cause I know you're still in control. My praise is a weapon, it's more than a sound. My praise is the shout that brings Jericho down. As long as I'm breathing, I've got a reason to praise the Lord, oh my soul. Praise the Lord, oh my soul. I won't be quiet, my God is alive. How could I keep it inside? Praise the Lord, oh my soul. Praise 'cause you're sovereign, praise 'cause you reign, praise 'cause you rose and defeated the grave, praise 'cause you're faithful, praise 'cause you're true, praise 'cause there's nobody greater than you. I praise 'cause you're sovereign, praise 'cause you reign, praise 'cause you rose and defeated the grave. I'll praise 'cause you're faithful, praise 'cause you're true, praise 'cause there's nobody greater than you. Praise the Lord, oh my soul. 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 I won't be quiet, my God is alive. How could I keep it inside? I won't be quiet, my God is alive. How could I keep it inside? I won't be quiet, my God is alive. How could I keep it inside? Praise the Lord, oh my soul.
Yes! Hallelujah! Woo! Thank you, Jesus.
My husband and I got to pastor for a little over 50 years, and he's already in heaven. He had the nerve to get promoted to be with Jesus before me. He had a stroke while he was driving to visit people in the hospital, Lewy body dementia, nasty form of dementia. So, long story short, we had wonderful years pastoring churches together. And I'm going to talk to you about the thing that, gosh, as pastors, we would have loved for our people to have had the sense of. I'm going to call it third class ticket theology. And I'll make sense out of that in a little bit. I found it from an old article in the Omaha World Herald. We pastored Nebraska for a while, written in 1833. and it was talking about stagecoach etiquette. And I'm going to quote to you what it said there. It says in the newspaper article, never imagine for a moment when you're on a stagecoach that you're going on a picnic. Expect annoyance, discomfort, and hardship. Well, but I never rode a real life stagecoach. So that's what, if you are taking notes, no big deal. If you're not, why don't we just call this morning third class ticket theology? And let me tell you the 3 classes of tickets you could get for the stagecoach, depending on how much money you wanted to spend. First class ticket, passengers receive service while comfortably remaining inside the coach. So whatever happened, they didn't have to get out. They didn't have to do anything. They just sat there and stayed inside the coach. Second class ticket, they paid a little less, or a little less. And the passengers disembark and observe while others are pushing a disabled coach. So let's say we got somehow, the horses or something got a little off track, or there was some rut and they went slightly off the road and they're stuck there. Okay, if you're a second class person, you get out of the stagecoach, but you don't have to push. You're just watching the other people push. And third class, you've already figured it out. Third class, yeah, that's who I want you to be even more, and that's who I hope I am. Passengers disembark and push the coach out of the mud or the hill. And honest to goodness, it says this, without complaint. They understood people, didn't they? So it said, push it, losers, push it. You didn't, you, you didn't pay that much for this anyway. Push the lousy stagecoach and do it without griping. So I thought, well, they must have been pastors part-time, 'cause a lot of people, And so that's what I'm reminding us in this awesome church to do, to be a third-class ticket holder and to continue to help. What cool core values, house habits, what a mission statement, reaching imperfect people to encounter life change in Jesus. What a huge deal. But let me explain to you, the fulfillment isn't in coming to church, because you know what? A lot of people come to church on Sundays. Good for you that you came. We're so honored to have you. The fulfillment is when you do more than you come to church, you are the church. Isn't that true? You're a third class ticket holder. You're saying, hey, and it's not anything weird like I'm a member of this and all other churches are horrible. No. But it's that sense of ownership that you say, I'm going to stay here and I'm going to make this my church, and I'm going to be a third class ticket holder. I'm going to help it. I'm going to help welcome people. I'm going to help make this church what it could be. This church was planted only, 2 years ago, about? Well, what a big deal. See, lots of people go to big churches, and that's cool. That's awesome. But I think even more fulfilling is to come to a church like this that's just beginning. So someday you'll have the stories. I was there at the beginning. I was there when, gosh, we remember this and that. And I was able to make a big difference. It's great, again, to go to a big church. Nothing wrong with that. We pastored a lot of big churches, but they weren't always big. I think some of the most fulfilling times were when we were beginning, and they were closer to this size. And we had people who got in the trenches with us. So I'm going to do something so simple. I want you to remember this. I made my own little copy of the tickets that are there. Give me one so I can have it. And Shelley, have you got somebody to help you? Get somebody else on that side. Okay. I made you just a little simple replica of a third class ticket. And I want you to keep it wherever you might be able to keep it, whether you stick it in your Bible or a wallet or just somewhere. Because in a world of people that act like they're first class ticket holders, they want to just show up for church and see the show. Gosh, how fulfilling to be the kind of person. Anybody not get yours? I'd love for everybody to have one. So let me unpack lots of decades of being a senior pastor along with my hero and husband. And let me tell you, if the things that we would have longed for somebody to say to our church, what makes you a third class ticket holder? All right, number one, find something worth dying for and then live for it. Like making a difference in this area. Find something worth dying for, a purpose, something bigger than, how much money you yourself can have or how famous you yourself become. Find some purpose in life bigger than yourself, worth. And obviously, we're not going to all go out and commit suicide, but the point is something that really is worth sacrifice on your part. And see, for me anyway, maybe you're not like this, but self gets in the way for me a lot of times. I can be selfish. I think most of us can. And if you've never broken down that little acronym of self, SELF, Satan's exact location forever. That's self. And so often I let myself get in the way. And so, gosh, to go beyond myself and say, I'm going to have a purpose. And maybe part of that purpose for you would be pouring your life into this wonderful church. And again, not just coming to church, but in your ways, being part of this church. I love Matthew 6, verses 19 through 21. Jesus said, don't hoard treasure down here, because that's a lot of people's purpose in America now. Just get rich, Don't hoard treasure down here where it's eaten by moth and corroded by rust, or worse, stolen by burglars, it says in the message. Stockpile treasure in heaven, where it's safe from moth and rust and burglars. It's obvious, isn't it? The place where your treasure is the place you will most want to be and end up being. What a deal to be able quietly to say in your heart, I may not be rich, as it were, this side of heaven, but I have a great retirement plan, for real. And I, in a wonderful way, not just a Pollyanna thing, I'm living for that. I love Proverbs 23, verses 4 and 5. Don't wear yourself out trying to get rich. Restrain yourself. Riches, and listen to this line, Message Bible again. Riches disappear in the blink of an eye. Wealth sprouts wings and flies off into the wild blue yonder. Wealth and all that it represents. So we're not saying don't be wealthy. We're just saying make sure whatever measure of physical, financial blessing you have, that you're investing it in something, yourself, your family, but even beyond that as well. Because boy, in the blink of an eye, it can go away. William James, obviously the amazing philosopher, said, the greatest use of life is to spend it on something that will outlast it. Isn't that true? What are you spending your life on that will outlast you, that will still be there? Because it's demoralizing, You're about one generation away from extinction. That bothers me to hear. I mean, all right, your grandkids will remember you and your name, But your great grandkids, they're going to have to think real hard to even remember your name. When I say you're about one, or maybe if you had a really tight family, two generations away from nobody even remembering your name. But it's what you do for eternal purposes that last. I love this. Well, let me go on. Number two, if you're a third class ticket holder, remember that the most important things in life aren't things. Isn't that true? The most important things in life aren't things, they're people. Every time that door opened, I know Ben and Shelley and the team here, every time that door opened today, their heart in a sweet way jumped a little. I love that. I love that they care that you showed up this morning. Big deal. I love that they'd notice if you didn't show up this morning. Big deal. Because the most important things in life aren't things, they're people. Individual people. I say all the time, Jesus didn't die for the whole world. And then I pause to make people nervous. And then the obvious following statement, he died for one person at a time. One person at a time. And so in such a cool way, life change begins just with an invitation to show up for this church next week. Just a simple invitation, nothing big. But wow, to say, I can be here, I can make a difference. And I love on this the idea of loving other people. We all know the Bible celebrates it, but let me read again. First John 4, it's verses 7 and 8. My beloved friends, let us continue to love each other, since love comes from, where does it say? Sure, everyone who loves. It doesn't say everyone who prophesies. It doesn't say everyone who has money. It doesn't say everybody who's highly intelligent. It says everybody who loves is born of God. That's a big deal. And experiences a relationship with God. The person who refuses to love, who says, that's just not my personality. Person who refuses to love doesn't know the first thing about God. Not really, because God is love. And so you can't know him if you don't know love. A renowned leader, Stephen Covey, talks about it in one of his books, The Eighth Habit. What happens if you go to the doctor this week? Really, you were raced in the emergency room because you had a very serious, what wound up being heart attack. And as the doctor did the examinations, he said to you, I'm really sorry to tell you, this was very serious. We caught it in time. They got you here, but you need to be very aware of not even leaving the country, keeping yourself relatively near some capable hospital, because the kind of heart attack you had makes you very likely to have another one. There's not a great deal we can do to prevent that. And so, quite honestly, you're in peril for a much shortened life. And then Stephen Covey goes on to say, if you heard that kind of message and there was an invisible date, apart from the miraculous, obviously, on your life, what kind of priorities would you have? Obviously, things wouldn't be a big deal that were a big deal before. Your priorities would be things that would last. And then he makes an interesting statement. He said, why do we mostly have to have crucial, crushing news to think logically about putting first things first? Isn't that true? And so it is that, gosh, things aren't the big deal. People are the big deal. And I know you've heard it a million times, but people will forget a bunch of stuff that you say, but they'll never forget how the Jesus inside of you made them feel. Isn't that true? And so again, I love this quote. Have you ever heard of the famous old preacher D.L. Moody? Yeah, he was great. So if you haven't heard of him, you've heard of him now. And when right before he died, he said, "When I die, don't think I'm gone, because I'll be alive in that man, and that man, and that man, and that man." And I hope that someday that can be said of me. I take so many vitamins, I'm going to live another 30 years. But, you know, when I die, if Jesus doesn't come first, and I apologize for my runny nose, it's called, I love the allergies here. But I want people to be able to say, oh, there's a little bit of her in them and in them and in them. Let me jump ahead on my notes. To be a third class ticket person, let one of your life mottos, we all have mantras or things that really and sometimes we say them, but we don't live them. I hope you would live by this. Be wit. Now, if I was with a bunch of teenagers, I'd ask you to take a ballpoint pen or something and write on your hand, but you don't need to do that. WIT. And it stands for the obvious. Whatever it takes. Do you remember those guys in the New Testament who wanted to get their friend to Jesus? And the room was so crowded. How'd they get him? What did they do to get him in the room? Do you remember that? Sure. I heard somebody mumble. They cut a hole in the roof. That's a wit person. That's whatever it takes. Go through the roof. You know what? Good churches, have people that come along, they're first class, second class passengers. But if you're a third class passenger, hey, you're going to get the stagecoach out of the mud, whatever it takes. Does that make sense? You're not going to just stand there and wait for somebody else to tell you what to do. You're going to go look and see if there's a board you can put under that wheel to make it a little easier. I'm just saying, you figure it out. You're not waiting for somebody else to tell you that somebody needs to talk to that person to make them feel good, or somebody needs to pick up the trash as you're walking in the front door. There wasn't any trash, by the way, but I'm just saying, you're a wit person, whatever it takes. And you know what? I wrote down here on this, Michael Jordan. I happen to love basketball. He said, when you're not practicing, remember that someone somewhere is. And when you meet that guy on the court of life, expect him to always win. Isn't that true? Because they were doing the work. And I'm kind of like when people say to me, Jeannie, what irritates you? What irritates you? Oh, let me give you a list, but right at the top of it, I've worked with teenagers and young adults my whole life, so I'm fine with a bunch of sin that they can repent of and move on. I'm not saying keep sinning. I'm just saying, clean up, act, and go on. But let me tell you what drives me crazy. You don't want to be this around me. Lazy people. Oh my God. Just pretend like you're hustling. Just pretend. Fake it till you make it. But don't be lazy. And I did some study. The Bible talks about work over 500 times. And the first James 1:22, the first chapter says, be doers of the word and not hearers only. Not just lazy hearers. And then it goes on to say, deceiving yourself. Because, when we're people who hear, but we don't do anything with what we're hearing, deception easily sets in. If you're a wit person, and by the way, I'm going to read another quote, may make some of you mad. D.L. Moody says, that famous preacher I told you about, after a man became a true Christian, I would work him day and night on my team. I believe for every one man killed by overwork for the cause of Christ, there are 10,000 men who ultimately die from laziness. So I don't know about his figures. I'm just saying that, gosh, in our culture, You know, years ago, people used to be worried about being workaholics. Well, you know what? I don't worry so much that the emerging culture is gonna burn out. They may whine about burnout, but I don't see a bunch of them who burn out. I see more that tend to rust out. And so I'm saying, gosh, you know, I'm not saying work 24/7. I'm just saying have fun, be wholehearted, but again, whatever it takes, be all the way in. So something is different because you're a part of again, Capital City Church. And let me jump down. My little iPad keeps having a demonic problem, and so I'm I'm fine. And then number 4, to be a third class ticket person, just write on your notes 24, and I'll explain it. For years, it's not this way now because I don't have a desk. That's why it's not that way now. But I, on the front, the main drawer of my desk, I had a little yellow Post-it note right in front, and I had scribbled with my little ballpoint pen 24. And I would see the little, it became pretty worn, the little Post-it note every time I'd reach in the desk or something else. It was my reminder that Jesus washed 24 feet right before he went to the cross. He didn't wash 22 feet. In other words, he didn't wash all the disciples' feet, but omit Judas's because he knew he was going to betray him. He didn't just wash 2 feet. He could have just washed John the Beloved and said, he's my favorite. I'm washing that guy's feet. He washed 24. If you really want to make a difference in the kingdom, I can't think of any muscle any more important to grow than your forgiver. Because if you really want to make a difference for God, you're going to have opportunities to get hurt or offended every day. People are going to say dumb things. People are going to take advantage of you. People are not going to be at all what you would wish them to be. They're going to say things. And my goodness, if you make the mistake of being on social media very much, they'll say it all on social media because they're just chickens there. They hide behind a screen and say whatever. And I'm not saying let people walk on you. That's certainly not what I'm saying. But third class ticket holders, they don't easily take offense. And they know that, gosh, you know, their life is to love and believe in people, even people who are not kind to them, who hurt them. Again, I can't imagine the feeling of knowing you're about to be betrayed by the guy and you're washing his feet. Closest I ever came to that was my amazing hero and husband had been terminated from a large church we pastored many years ago by the board. They thought the church wasn't growing fast enough. And but that's not the story the church heard. And we had resigned to make it peaceable. And he had one last board meeting, and he said, I'm going to wash the board members' feet. And I thought he had a fever when he said that. You know, you're going to do what? You know, I'd be biting their toes. I'm not washing their feet. But he did. He did. And what I'm saying to you is not that you're supposed to go out and wash everybody's literal feet. It's a symbolic act of humility, and we all know that. That was very common in Old and New Testament time. But I'm saying to you, gosh, wash their feet spiritually and emotionally by not treating them the way they treat you. Wash their feet emotionally by giving when you want to make a crack back. The bigger person is always the person who gives kindness in the place of harshness and rudeness. 24. You see it on your ticket. I wrote 24 on your ticket just to remind you. 24. That's how you're a third-class ticket person. And then last of all, to be a third-class ticket person, I'm going to take you to a story. I told a story from history at the amazing event for the school clubs that Ben and Shelley ran. It was so awesome. You need to be very proud that your church makes such a difference in local schools. And I'm going to tell you another story from history. By the way, history is story. I think I can learn a lot about God and his ways by studying stories of history. So let me tell you a closing story from Scottish history, and the year would be 1333. Sir James Douglas was a well-known Scottish hero in history. He was even better known than William Wallace, the guy who was portrayed in the old movie, if you ever saw it, Braveheart. And Sir James Douglas was the captain of the Scottish armies during the reign of a gentleman, maybe you've heard of him before, King Robert the Bruce, excuse me. And King Robert the Bruce, years before he was made king, had been a very unbelievable captain in the armies from Scotland himself. And it was the end of King Robert Bruce's life. He had come down with a serious sickness. I'm not in my study. I didn't even hear what it was. And he called Sir James Douglas, who'd become like a son to him, in. And he said to him, son, I had only one unfulfilled dream in my life. I wanted to fight myself against the enemies of the cross. Because if you know anything about Scotland, there were religious wars that went on there for years, fighting against anybody who were Christians against the cause of Christ. And so the king had said, I wanted to fight against them for the cause of my Lord. But he said, obviously now with this illness, and he was 50 years old at that point, he said, I'll never have the physical stamina to be able to even ride a horse again, let alone to go into battle. So he said, now there's only one thing left for me, and it is to face death with bravery, and that I will do. And he said, the promise that I ask of you, son, is that when I die, you promise me that you will carry my heart into battle against the enemies of the cross, because my heart will never be at peace in the grave. My heart knows that it yearns to do battle one time myself against the enemies of the cross. And so obviously Sir James Douglas said to him, sir, it will be the highest honor of my life to carry your heart into battle against the enemies of the cross. And so another several months elapsed until the king breathed his last breath. And history says that when they told Sir James Douglas that he had passed, this strong warrior paused and could not help himself from weeping. And he walked slowly into the chamber where a big fireplace was roaring to keep the king warm, and pulled out a sharp knife that he carried and then slit open the chest of the king, as he had been requested by the king to do, and reached inside and took out his heart, and then walked a few steps to the fireplace, and then took one of the fireplace utensils and placed the heart in there and put it into the fire to, as it were, cremate it, and let his heart become ashes. Having prepared for this moment for ever since the serious talk with the king. He then took off a chain that he had around his neck with a heavy locket. And when he had taken the king's heart, now ashes, having been cremated, he gently opened it and put it in to the locket. He closed it, kissed it, and then history tells us that he put the locket, the heavy chain, and the masculine large locket around his neck. And history tells us that the locket never left his neck. Went everywhere, every place that he was, that he did battle, he wore, because he was ready at any moment with the king's heart. It was a couple of years later, and Sir James was doing guard duty with just a small group of his Scottish warriors, when they came up on a hill and they saw that some of their Scottish partners, only a handful of them, were being pounded by whoever at that point was choosing to be their enemies. And so he turned to a small group of men because he knew that in order to save the other men, they were going to have to move fast. They weren't going to be able to go back and get some help from the city, from more of the men. And so they were quickly trying to game plan when the enemy saw them and recognized that it was Sir James Douglas. And so they let out a war cry, and they were riding their horses up to begin the battle. And I want to quote it exactly right. History says that Sir James Douglas, realizing they didn't have time to do anything else, and that because there were so many more of the enemy than of they, there was high likelihood that they would not leave this battle alive. And history records that he then reached in and ripped the locket off and then threw it in the direction the enemy was coming for with his strong arms, as far as he could throw it, and shouted so loudly, "Men, will you with me this day fight for the heart of our king?" Wow. And they did. They did. They fought so hard, so long. If you study Scottish history, it was one of the turning points of their battle against those who came against the cross of Jesus Christ and the Christian faith in Scotland. Ultimately, others came to join so that they had many more men that were fighting with them. But before they joined, every single one of the men that had been with Sir James Douglas had given their life. Now, I wouldn't even believe this, and maybe somehow somebody with a vivid imagination made up this part of the story, but the God I serve is so into details sometimes that I think I do believe this. They say that when they found Sir James Douglas dead, his body already starting to stiffen from the lack of life, that he had in one hand his sword that he clave to. I can believe that. But somehow, by the miraculous hand of a God who loves us, we're told that where he fell after he had been struck onto the ground was right by the locket that contained the king's heart. And that in his other hand, now stiffened from death, he clenched that locket. I don't have a locket, But I'll tell you what, by God's grace, I will finish the race with the wind in my face. And that's what I sure hope all of you do. That's why in a few minutes, if you can hang for the leadership time, you get spaghetti, like I said, and then I think you'll enjoy it. I'm going to talk a little bit about grit, how to be one of those amazing people who stay in the battle. Third-class ticket holders are so gritty. But today, let's do something simple. Even if you're a guest here today, I don't know who's regular and who's a guest. My name's Jeannie. I should have told you that before, and I'm sure pumped that you showed up today. But why don't we, worship team, why don't you come on back up? And one of my favorite songs is We Speak Jesus. If you don't know it, you'll learn it. But just for a minute, let's have prayer to say, Lord, let me remember this morning. Let me keep that little third-class ticket and let that become part of the signature of my life. And selfishly, I live in Atlanta, or I'd come here and help you, and I would love it. But selfishly, I would love for you to say to the Lord, perhaps, if you live around here, I know some of you don't, Lord, I want to make this church, I want to be a third-class ticket holder here. Why don't you just reverently stand right where you are? And let me remind you, third-class ticket holders find a purpose worth dying for and live for it. Remember that people are more important than things. Live a wit lifestyle, whatever it takes. Live a 24 lifestyle. Because people can be jerks and mean, but loving them anyway. Again, not letting everybody just walk on you, but choosing, instead of retaliation, to be bigger than that. And then last of all, to fight for the heart of your king. To have, you know what, I can't think. There are lots of things that have happened in my life, and gosh, I would have loved to have quit, not so much on Christianity, but on ministry. What's kept me in the game? Well, I wasn't fighting for people. I was fighting for him.